Well, to those in the Sexy Marriage Radio Nation, they may or may not know how much of a reader I am, but 2 months ago, I came across Brant Hansen and his book, Unoffendable. Plowed through that real quick, which then led me straight to The Truth About Us, which I absolutely loved because it's just that idea. The subtitle is the very good news about how very bad we are, which I totally agree with. And then his most recent book is The Men We Need, God's Purpose for Manly Men, the Avid Indoorsman, or Any Man Willing to Show Up. And so it is a huge honor to welcome Brant Hansen to the show today.
Thanks, man. I like that. Sexy Marriage Radio Nation. That's cool.
Well, I kind of look at it as anybody that listens to the show, they're part of the nation. You know,
yeah,
it's just the
I like
way
that. I'm going to take that.
It's yours. Take it. Totally fine. Cool. So, Brant, this is going to be fun because I've read a whole lot of books on men and manliness. I do mastermind groups for men on just where we can't. The only hard and fast rule in these groups is you can't talk about what you do for a living because that's usually just our go-to, and then we don't go beyond. And so I was intrigued by your newest book and absolutely loved it. And I guess let's just start with how did this come about?
Well, it's a great first question because I'm not the typical guy to write a man book, and I'm more of a nerdy person. My coffee mug, I know people can't see it on the podcast, but it's a periodic table. But I have a puppet collection. I play the flute and the accordion. I was president of the Illinois Student Librarians Association for the entire state of Illinois. So
that's strong.
Yeah, I don't want to intimidate anybody with that, but it's a fact. You know, it ain't bragging if you can back it up.
Yep.
But I've been married long enough, 32 years, and my wife supports this, like trying to pass some wisdom along for and my producer, my show, she's a single woman. She's in her 40s, and we've been working together for 10 years. And she grew up in Pittsburgh, steel workers, football players, hunters. She's like, what the heck is this guy? Like, she shows up to my show and sees this weird manifestation of a man. Mm-hmm. And then she comes to my house and she's like, wait a second, this guy's onto something. He makes everybody feel secure around him. And she encouraged me to write this thing. And I think that is the nubbin when you get right down to it, when I try to get at it in the book, but all the other stuff is just trappings of masculinity, I think. And, but when you get right down to it, this is the essence of it.
Right. Because you're talking about something deeper, because you even go with this idea that I love you expounded on the idea of Adam and in the Bible, and the idea of, he didn't show up in a lot of ways.
And he had a job, which was, and this is what I'm trying to say too, because so many people have deconstructed masculinity. Well, okay, and a lot of that is good stuff. I mean, it's reasonable to deconstruct things that need to be blown up, but what's the construction?
Right.
Like, we actually need a vision of what we're supposed to be rather than what we're not supposed to be at some point. So I was trying to take a shot at it by saying, I think it's the job that Adam was given specifically at the beginning, to be a keeper of the garden. That means a protector of this space and somebody who allows the people around him or the vulnerable species to thrive. Mm-hmm. Because he's who he is. It should be life-giving. People shouldn't feel threatened. They should feel protected.
Right.
So there's a lot to that. It's not just about physical protection. It's about, again, the people around me should be able to bloom.
Right.
Because of me being a keeper of the garden. Obviously, Adam totally blows it. He's utterly passive. He doesn't rise to the occasion. We're still suffering for that. But that's what I was trying to do, is give that box top picture to the puzzle of what is masculinity. I think that's it.
Yeah. And I love that, because we are in a society right now, at the time of this recording, that it's tearing everything down, and some of the stuff absolutely needs to be, but then you have to, that immediately begs the question of, to replace with what?
Yeah, with what? So, if you're a 17-year-old guy, it's great to have deconstruction of toxic masculinity. Okay, but who am I? What the heck am I supposed to be doing?
Right.
And if you don't have a vision for that, you're aiming at nothing, which means it's just nihilism. And you're just bathing in nihilism and video games and pornography and whatnot. It's unless you have a better vision, you can't replace all that garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And not that video games are garbage. Actually, I still play them, but you know.
No, I actually used your chapter with my son on the idea of you don't play the first person ones because they're too immersive and you would love it too much and you would never get anything done. And so you're like, out of wisdom, I probably shouldn't do something I really, really love that much because I could go overboard.
Yeah, I like taking that tack instead of just a blanket. These things are evil. It's like actually the biggest problem is that they're too fun.
Right.
And I have to look at myself and reasonably say, like to your son, or like, look, we don't want to be a guy who sits and has pretend adventures, right?
Right.
I mean, so it's so fun. It's easy to level up. You get a dopamine rush. It's easier than real life.
Right.
But that's not who we want to be, right? And usually even a 14-year-old could be like, yeah, I get that.
I get it. It's a good escape, but it's not something that provides a whole lot of meaning long term.
No.
That I feel really successful in conquering of things.
Right. It's fake. It's you've got this drive to conquer things or to do the right thing or defend or perform heroic deeds.
Mm-hmm.
That drive shouldn't be met through fake life.
Right. Although that is a lot of what the world proposes.
Absolutely. But it's such a rope-a-dope.
Yep.
Because for guys, especially, but for women too, it's just like this feels like the real thing. And then pow, you're left with just yourself.
Right.
Over and over and over. And that seems to be the nature of hell. Like people choose it.
Yeah.
Because it looks good and then bam, oh, we're suffering.
Yeah. So you alluded to this earlier. I love the concept of men and passivity is one of the bigger issues that even started with Adam in the sense that he was passive. He didn't show up and expound on that.
Well, I've heard people call it toxic passivity, and I think it's very true. And in Adam's case, I always thought, maybe you did too, but I honestly always thought like when the tempter shows up with Eve, that Adam was like 2 miles away, naming hippos and giraffes and stuff. And so he didn't know what was going on. But if you actually read the biblical account, it sounds like he's right there.
Right.
He's just not doing anything. And like, this is what you're tasked to do. So he doesn't do anything. He's utterly passive. He even has Eve hand him the fruit. But he doesn't even reach up and grab it. So I do see that a lot. And I know you probably encounter this a lot in what you do in your work. But I've heard from counselors that passive guys in marriage are a big thing. And it's just, it's in some cases, it's more prevalent that they're finding than actually the toxic He-Man, I'm going to run and domineer everything. Yeah,
that's a much more common trait from my experience too. I think what it devolves into more often is it's the passive husband and controlling wife, and neither one of them are really good at either one of those roles.
Right.
Or nor do they want to be one of those roles.
We don't need either person to be either one of those things.
Right.
We don't need that flip-flopped. We don't need, but a man who actually understands his role. What I was trying to say in this book too, and I hope this came through. I imagine it did. I wasn't telling guys you should be this keeper of the garden because women find it highly attractive.
Right.
But they do.
Right.
So it should be very instructive about who we really are when we're at our best. Because my wife, even though I'm not a handyman, even though I have neurological problems, shouldn't really be shooting guns and stuff. Like I'm none of those things. Right. Can't ride last time I was on a motorcycle, I hit a parked truck, and that's a true story. Like, even though I'm not those things, when I do show a willingness to do whatever it takes to defend her or make her feel secure, or my family or neighbors or little kids, or she finds that extremely attractive. So I'm telling guys, like, it's not a mystery why always the most attractive occupation for a man, according to women, is firefighter. Always. It always shows up number one.
Yeah.
Because there's this thing about a guy who's willing to go into a fire to rescue a child. Yeah. That women will always find attractive. And it should point us to something, because women are so brilliant and intuitive about who we're supposed to be.
Right. Yeah, and I think a close second in that survey is podcasters, right? Podcast hosts.
If only.
Exactly.
Yeah, the only, like, I'm a radio guy. The only time that we show up is like the most narcissistic, jobs, radio people. Like, dang it.
Well, okay, maybe they're sampling the wrong people. We can go with that.
Yeah, that's what I say. But I was just gonna say on the passive thing, a lot of times we don't identify that as threatening to our wives because we're so passive, but it is threatening.
Right. No, I mean,
it's unsettling.
Yeah, because it sets up this scenario where too often, particularly if kids are involved, and most of the people in the nation probably have experienced this in some regards. If you have kids in your relationship, that you have another kid to take care of in a lot of ways, because he doesn't stand up and make decisions. He doesn't take care of what he's responsible to take care of, and then you wonder. And this is the thing I love whenever guys ask me, I don't understand. My sex life is horrible. My passion is gone. I'm like, okay, well, are you acting like a child? Because it's likely she's not going to want to have sex with a child.
That's exactly right. Oh man. And the passivity undermines everything. And by passivity, I mean this question in a woman's mind of whether he will actually do what needs done and whether he's really engaged or not.
Right.
Because she's thinking, am I going to wind up on my own? Do I have to do everything for myself?
Right.
Am I the only one who really cares about this? Are the kids and I are the only, do I have another child in the house? That's so unsettling. And again, so unattractive.
Yeah.
So I have to be aware of that. I can sit and play FIFA on my PlayStation for hours, but I have to be aware that if I'm not engaged with real life and do stuff, my wife is not going to find that to be particularly hot.
Right.
Because she's like, what? You're being childish at some point.
Right. And this is what's so great of what the way you've framed this is, it's not that that's not an okay thing to do is play FIFA, but set some guidelines for yourself and stop and then re-engage, because everybody escapes. Everybody wants moments to, of just joy or getting lost in some other world, but then come out of it and be a part of the world again.
Well, look, I'm a Tolkien fan, but if I'm ignoring issues in life just to be in Middle Earth in my brain, which frankly I generally am, but if I'm ignoring issues in life, that's very indicative to her that I'm not being the man I could have been or should be, that she hoped I was going to be. Right. Like these are things that a woman is hoping. And what I was trying to say in the book too, none of this is chauvinistic or misogynistic. What I'm saying is the opposite. It's like we would have, if guys had this role of keeper of the garden, they understood it and they did it, our neighborhoods would be safer. There would be no need for a Me Too movement. Right. Because that's a betrayal of the role of a keeper of the garden, is to actually be a threat to a woman or to a vulnerable person. Right. It's the exact opposite. So everybody benefits, again, if we actually do inhabit this role. Yeah. And so I'm curious, because you go through this and you've talked about this before and some of the other things I've seen of you, the ways guys can show up, because what the world proposes is the machismo. Yeah. Hey, this is what you're supposed to do. Go out and conquer this, or go on this big grand adventure, or go hunt, or whatever. But in reality, it's a whole lot more variety than that. Totally. And that's a wonderful thing for somebody like me. And that's why I include avid indoorsmen. Like most guys' books, and you know this, it's not a slam on them, but I had to tell my own publisher, they're like, so the cover, we have some cover ideas. I'm like, do not do a cover where it's a silhouette of a dude standing on top of a mountain flexing or whatever. Right. I don't climb mountains. Nothing against it. Right. But there's an awful lot of us whose everyday lives are not meme worthy, and we're not silhouetted all the time against something awesome. Right. The daily life, you might be an IT professional, you might be a podcaster, you might be a therapist, you might be whatever, but in those roles, I'm telling guys, if you reorient those roles to becoming a keeper of the garden in your roles where you protect the vulnerable, use whatever resources you have. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's through giving, maybe it's through knowing people in your neighborhood, but being that it gives life to you because you'll find it energizing.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had, again, I'm very thankful for this, but even in my nerdy ways, like, so I'm good with words generally. I mean, I need to be for radio generally. And the funny thing is I'm having a halting, difficult time talking about this. I'm good with words.
I'm good with words. Watch what I'm going to string together here. Yes.
I'm so gooder than you guys. No, like, I get to use my words for this ministry I work with called Cure, which
Mm-hmm.
Cure has these hospitals around the world. These are for kids that have correctable disabilities. So I help these hospitals get funding to provide surgeries to kids that are abused, and they could, if they just had access to surgeries, they could walk.
Right.
So, and we get to tell them about Jesus. So I'm coming from that angle. That's who we are.
Right.
But to be a part of all these kids' stories, even though I'm not a He-Man protector, that kind of guy, I still am a protector.
Right.
I just use my words to do it.
Right.
And that's true, just as one more thing, that's true in your own home.
Right.
Because you think, and I mentioned this in the book, someone else had given this example. A lot of us guys will pat ourselves on the back, like, yeah, if there's an intruder in our house, I will stand up and I'll never let somebody, attack my wife. I will do whatever it takes. Like, that's good. That's a good starting point. But one guy had the realization, he said, I realize most of the time that actually doesn't happen. But what does happen is the intruder is me.
Mm-hmm.
With my words.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually destabilizing instead of building up so my wife can bloom and thrive. I'm actually destabilizing or cutting her down or subtly not blessing her with my words.
Right.
So it can start right there, no matter what your job is, no matter whether you're, ripped or, whatever, doesn't matter.
Right.
You can start with your words.
Right. And I think the distinction of what I'm hearing you talk about, Brant, is this idea of, it's not that I'm just buttering her up. It's just,
no.
It couples with all we've talked about thus far. It's my presence. It's my engagement. It's my sharing of myself and inviting of her to do the same. And that's just good relational dynamic.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because as I talked about this on one show fairly recently, and one of the comments I happened to catch on the YouTube was a guy actually said, oh, so you're talking about total emasculation then? I'm like, no, I'm talking about actually listening to your wife.
Right.
Actually listening is not emasculation. If you think it is, the irony is, and I could say this on the Sexy Marriage podcast, you'll have less sex if you don't listen to your wife. Like the emasculation thing, like,
yeah, bro,
like that. This life-giving protector, keeper of the garden, I want people to thrive around me role is again, it's life-giving in so many different areas.
Right. And that's that idea what we just talked about earlier too, of the passivity is the emasculating.
Yes.
That's what that is actually.
Yes. And you can be passive and be totally jacked.
Mm-hmm.
But see, if guys mistake what masculinity is, the weird thing is your wife will not like you and she will not be attracted to your muscles. She actually will resent them.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not being this keeper of the garden that she knows, whether she can articulate it or not. She knows that's who she wanted you to be. And you can spend all the time in the gym. You can have a giant, awesome truck. Right. You can do all that stuff. She will actually be unsettled and will resent you for it. Conversely, you can be a little out of shape. You can you can drive whatever small little, but she can find you extremely attractive if you're this kind of engaged guy who gets it.
Right, because that's what you're describing is the synergy that happens between males and females. Mm-hmm. That a lot of times, if one of us doesn't show up and play our role, and that's not a distinct. Here's a defined small little. It's uniquely who you are, and engagement in that life. Then they will react and respond to that, which then you will react and respond to, and that's the vicious cycle that we can easily get into in marriage.
Yeah, it can be a terrible cycle. Conversely, as you know, it can become virtuous. Mm-hmm. But it takes ownership on both parts. And if we don't have a vision for what that ownership looks like, then we got a problem.
Right. Right. And I love that framework because it's talking about there's something more that we need to be doing. So I think that's also deep into the DNA of humans is we know, getting that next house or getting that next job, or we all deeply know it's not going to sustain me. It's not going to fulfill in the long run.
Right. And that's what I appreciate about your emphasis in what you're doing. Say change is good. Like we're all becoming something. God is very interested in who we're becoming. That's his chief interest as far as I understand it. And so that's based on what we're doing today, what we're paying attention to today will determine everything for the future.
Right.
So yeah, that could start today. So it's really an opportunity. It's not a guilt trip. It's like, if you've blown it, so have I. But man, we can start this today, and there's gonna be some pretty immediate effects.
Yeah, I mean, some of the easiest ways, because this is what I still do. I'll have times with Pam. She'll be unloading because I'm married to a woman. She's a tax accountant, and so when it gets into the thick of things, she offloads her day to transition into home life sometimes. So it's a lot of listening to her, which I can easily do that because that's what I do for a living is listen. But there's times where I'll be listening, quote unquote, but not paying attention. And when I recognize that, moving back into, I'm sorry, honey, I checked out for a second. Where were you? And that's a recalibrating right back into presence. Yes.
And again, that's life-giving to her. And she can be a star at work. She can do her stuff well. It feels secure. Like that's going to help her thrive.
And the cool thing of that is sometimes if that happens to me and I'll reorient back in, she can sometimes check it as, okay, I'm just blabbering on and on and on. I don't even know what I'm still talking about anymore. Okay, what about this? And now all of a sudden we transition into home.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So need was met.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely. Great. Well, Brant, this has been fun, and I can't thank you enough for the work that you do, the messages you send, and would love it if you kind of let the nation know how can they find you.
Well, BrantHansen.com is the way to do it, and it's BRANT. It's Brant with an A, and then Hansen, HANSEN. And we do a podcast. It's called the Brant and Sherry Oddcast. We've been doing that for a while too, and it's available all the usual places.
Perfect. Well, I've enjoyed the conversation thus far, and I look forward to transitioning here in just a second to the extended content with you.
Cool.